Thank you.
So, it's been a few years since we had you in, and the last time you were here, we were speaking about NOPI Cookbook. And it seems like quite a change or a shift in terms of a restaurant cookbook to this being a home cookbook. Tell us a little bit about this.
It's like the two ends of the spectrum of Ottolenghi Cookbook. So on the one hand, you have NOPI, and on the other hand, you have Simple. And it's a little bit the story of my personal journey. So the books really don't come in any, they're a bit random in the way they come out, because they are, the reasons why a certain book comes out at a certain time has a lot to do with the people that I collaborate with on the books and what we feel like doing. And with NOPI, it was out 2 years ago, it was Scully, who's the head chef there, was really eager to kind of put all that creative stuff that has gone into the making of that restaurant into a book. And we were starting writing down recipes, and I said to the publishers, look, we've got to do this now because this is happening. So that came out. And then Simple, which is, like I said, the other end of the spectrum, which is really geared towards home cooks and also much more kind of comfortable way of cooking with ease and simplicity, and we can talk more about that in a minute, came about after I've had a couple of supplements with The Guardian. So The Guardian called me, I publish recipes in The Guardian every weekend, but a few years ago my editor called me and said, I'd like 20 easy recipes for the spring for a supplement. And I went like, I don't do simple, I'm sorry. And I don't do easy either. And because it just seems so weird to even start thinking like that, because I've never had to convince anyone that it's not worth your while spending all this time in the kitchen to get something as good as what I thought I put there. But I said, okay, well, we'll think about it. And I sat down with my two collaborators on the book, Tara and Esme, who have been part of this process for quite a while. And we just started talking about what might be our 20 simple or easy recipes for the spring. There was also number of ingredients was limited, etc. And we just had so much fun. So we all kind of brought our kind of a little tricks from home, you know, things from cans and frozen. And Esme, who has been cooking for many years on boats, she was cooking on yachts for about 10 years. She had all these nifty tricks about, obviously you can't spend a lot of time and everything needs to be very solid and well-grounded, as you can imagine, on boats. Had her set of ideas and what to do. And we just like within 20 minutes, we had like 20 ideas, but really cool things that we were very proud of doing. And it was fun. And sometimes I'm sure from, you know, when it's applicable to almost every field of human creation, when you've got this kind of set of limitations, it actually makes you more creative. So it was like, okay, we need to make it simple in some ways. In some way, and that's how the columns, the supplements came about, and that's how the book came about as a kind of a result of those Guardian and the Guardian supplements. But the other thing that had also happened that led to this book, or the way the book has been has shaped up to be this thing, was that last year another cookery writer, Diana Henry, came up with a book called Simple. And as I saw that, and I go, oh gosh, no, what do we do now? Because she's just stolen my title, and it happened to us already before, really weirdly and bizarrely, when Simple came out. Plenty came out, which is 6 years ago, I think now. I published that book, and I got a really angry, not really angry, but frustrated email from her saying my next book was going to be Plenty, and it's funny. So she had to find a kind of a derivative title with the word plenty in it, and now I call this book Ottolenghi Simple rather than Simple. And I was really happy to do that, because what it made us think is we sat down and thought, what makes Ottolenghi simple? So obviously we had to complicate things. And so we said, so I'll tell you about the extra complication that we added to the simple notion, and that's the coding system with the SIMPLE and L and E. And essentially what we tried to do is we started talking to people around us and asked them, what is simple cooking for you? And we got really different answers. So some would say, oh, you know, it's about coming home and putting a dish on the table within 20 minutes or half an hour. And other people said, I don't want to go shopping. You know, I just want to cook it from things that I really kind of have lurking around, a packet of rice, a couple of lemons, and, you know, some garlic, you know, things that you make from what you've got. Others said, I really want to cook everything in advance. So either for weekend cooking or for weekday cooking or for weekend cooking, I just want to make sure everything is ready, and then I just put it out or set it or put it together at the very last minute. So there were very different notions of what simple cooking is, and hence the SIMPLE, and each one is a different category of recipes in the book. S stands for short on time. So anything that would take, you know, 20 minutes, half an hour to cook. The I stands for ingredients, 10 or less, which in my world, 10 or less is really the bare minimum. You know, there's not Jamie Oliver's five ingredients. The M stands for make ahead.
Time, yeah.
The P stands for pantry, so we cover that, you know, rice, pasta, couscous, everything that is kind of frozen things that you must, frozen peas, frozen corn, and tins. And I mean, it sounds terrible, but actually those are some of my favorite dishes in the book. The L stands for lazy, and lazy is those, it's not you being lazy, it's just the attitude of being lazy when you want to be. And those are recipes that kind of cook themselves, stews and roasts. And so you put it there, you go read a book, you come back, and you've got a meal. And the E is kind of an extra category that we added, which is called easier than you think. And that's that is more about a state of mind than anything else. So for me, one of the reasons why people are kind of a little bit intimidated by certain ways of cooking is because they've gotten into their heads that they can't cook this thing, or they're not bakers, or you know, those kind of there's notions. And you know, cooking, like many other things, is 90% psychology. And the E is like an ice cream. You never thought you were going to make ice cream if you don't have an ice cream maker. So it's a non-churn ice cream, or it's a quick bread that you can do if you're not, even if you're not a baker, or certain desserts. It's also things that have like a complicated French names, like a confit or something like that. You think that's just for restaurants, but that's not for me. But actually, it could be. So yeah, that's the system. So every recipe in the book would have at least one of those marks, but could have more of them. Some recipes are all 6 of them.
So if I wanted to make something in under 30 minutes, I'd look for everything with the S symbol.
With the S on it, yeah. So that's the way. I mean, it's really about, and so we were talking just now. I'm doing a podcast at the moment called Simple Pleasures, and the podcast came about from the same series of conversations that we were having about simple cooking, and I wanted to just expand that a little bit into other conversations with people that are either they're from food or they're not from food, but kind of can say something about does it mean to cook or live simply or with more ease. And so I expanded this from kitchens to other areas of life, and I've got people coming on the podcast and talking to me about what they do, what makes them at ease, or what other aspects of their life, apart from what they're kind of famous for, they've kind of pared down or kind of loosened up a little bit. And I think it's just really refreshing sometimes to talk about this, because for me, I meet a lot of cooks, and many of them talk about anxiety when it comes to food. And for me, the idea of mixing cooking with anxiety is really counterintuitive, because cooking should be the one thing that is de-stresses, right? That's what I got into the kitchen, to de-stress. And I think it should really be, this should be the whole story. There shouldn't be anything beyond the de-stressing in the kitchen. But because cooking is also used to impress, and people put a lot of pressure on themselves to impress, often it's about like kind of reinventing yourself every time you walk into the kitchen. And that is really stressful. I couldn't do it. To kind of create a cuisine, a meal from a cuisine that you haven't even tasted, you know, like, and it's, you want to do that sometimes, but essentially it really isn't the way forward. The way forward, if you want to use the kitchen as a tool to inject some kind of more ease, as I said, or simplicity, or a sense of, simplicity, then you actually want to cook something that you've cooked before, or something that is very familiar, or something that is just the second nature to you. Nigella, who was on my podcast, called it as competence. And she says competence doesn't seem like it's not a sexy word, although when she says it, of course it's sexy. But it's not a sexy word, but it means that you kind of just do something over and over again and become really good at it, and then you get over all those kind of issues that stand in the way of putting a good meal on the table. And I think I personally prefer to go to someone's house knowing that I might have something at that friend's house that I've had before, but it's really good, right? Like, I don't care that I've had it maybe last year. It's absolutely fine.
But I certainly suffer from that anxiety where, you know, I don't cook that much, so it's a matter of, you're right, like I need to practice. How many times do you think I'd need to cook a dish to like put my own twist to yours, for example? Yeah,
so essentially it depends on what you choose to cook. So for instance, I've got 2 recipes in the book for baked rice. Baked rice is a really cool way to cook rice. I know many people that don't have a rice cooker and haven't come from an Asian culture are a little bit intimidated by cooking rice because it's quite easy to overcook or to not have enough liquid. So you don't want your rice to be al dente. Baked rice is a really good way. You kind of throw a lot of things in a roasting tray or baking tray, and you seal it with foil and stick it in the oven, and you can kind of leave it there for longer than you think. It isn't strictly necessary, and it won't really spoil or anything. And it's really a good way to infuse with lots of flavor, because you got a lot of surface there, so you can put. I add like mint leaves or cinnamon or garlic, and it just spreads through the rice. Essentially, the cooking liquids turn into a really aromatic, beautiful aromatic stock that just makes the rice so delicious. And then what you choose to do with that rice is really up to you. So once you've mastered this kind of very simple technique of cooking rice by baking it, it's easy to improvise. There is one recipe here for the rice that I just cook all the time at the moment. It's the one with the tomatoes that actually there's a version of which is served today here, but I don't know if they followed it strictly, but but essentially, because when you cook for a big crowd, you don't really do that. But you take cherry tomatoes and garlic cloves and some shallots, and you throw them in with cinnamon and olive oil, and you put it in the oven. That's one of the lazy recipes, because you just leave it there for 20 minutes, and those vegetables just cook and flavor the oil. And then you throw a packet of rice in and some water, and you put foil and let it do its thing again for another 25 minutes. So it takes time, but essentially very little effort. And you get like a whole beautiful, fragrant meal for rice. You know, it's like it's got everything there. It's got the vegetables, it's got the rice. You can add something else, but it's super delicious. And I do it every weekend because I know people love it, and it's like it is very, very easy. I can go and kind of play with the kids while this is doing its thing.
I want us to talk a little bit about the pantry. The P. Your pantry is likely to be very different from mine. Yeah. So
most people, I guess, yeah.
What's the philosophy behind the pantry?
So the pantry is at the back of the book. We listed a list. There's a list of about 10 ingredients, not about exactly 10 ingredients that are kind of this is the contract you sign when you buy the book. You've got to get these 10 ingredients. And believe me, narrowing it down to 10 from 100 was quite hard. But But actually, the idea is often people, the number one complaint at the, the bottom of my Guardian column comments, which I don't look at, but people tell me, is those ingredients. My God, where do you get the ingredients? And it's so. I address this in this book as well by saying, okay, there's 10 ingredients. It's not a lot to buy. It's not even expensive. You buy them, and they take you quite a long way in the book. So they will reappear in different recipes. So some of them would be familiar to people who've been cooking my recipes, like sumac and za'atar that you mentioned, preserved lemon. There's also black garlic, which is a kind of a slightly more recent addition. Tahini, of course, but it has to be a good tahini.
So what's good tahini? What
good
gets
tahini
the Ottolenghi tick
is
of approval?
Well, I always get into trouble because there's a bit of kind of a chauvinism about my appreciation of tahini that comes from my part of the Middle East rather than other parts of the world. So I would say it here now, and whoever's, all Greeks and Cypriots, close your ears and say, Greek tahini is not good. It's grainy.
I see a future where Greek tahini sales are plummeting.
No, the thing is, there is a brand that you find in many supermarkets called Cypressa, and it's just not. Sorry, I don't want to get anyone. I should probably shut my mouth now.
Well, what's good? Let's shift to what's good.
Tahini from Lebanon or Palestinian or Israeli tahinis. They're just better. The sesame seeds are toasted properly, so it's nice and brown and luscious. And also, there's no graininess. So all the husks are properly removed. So it's really, really smooth. And for me, the sesame being really good and tahini being really smooth are what makes a good tahini a really good tahini. And once you've tried a proper one or a really good tahini, you realize how good it is. It's a bit like olive oil. There's a whole range, from very good to not that great. And I'm not going to mention countries that bad olive oil. But it is really, actually, it isn't about the country. It's about how it's being done. So that's a good tahini. So, going back to the 10 ingredients, we narrowed it down to 10. And those 10 ingredients are, for this particular book, are kind of the building blocks of the pantry that I'd like people to have. They're not necessary, and you'd find recipes that are literally, cauliflower, and that's about it, and butter and oil, and you don't need to get a fancy pantry. But those 10 ingredients are really cool to have, and that is it. And the other elements in the pantry are things that I think normal pantries will have.
Right.
Rice, pasta, frozen peas, those kind of.
So the Ottolenghi 10 ingredients still retain the Ottolenghiness, despite, perhaps the title being a bit of an oxymoron.
Yeah.
For some
the
people,
oxymoron in the title is the one thing I'm trying to combat by doing that. And yeah, I mean, I do think that we managed to find ways to make the recipes enough Ottolenghi without disappointing anyone. So keeping the surprise element, the kind of the idea that something is a little bit challenging, but at the same time also comforting, which has always been at the top of my agenda. So to make an Ottolenghi recipe, which is funny that I say that, that's my surname, but I get that there's something beyond it's got a life of its own now. It's
a brand.
And it means that it can't just be. It cannot be. I'm not saying it in any prerogative way, but it's not a Nigel Slater recipe. Those are like a really good pea soup. It's just that won't cut the mustard. So it needs to have some kind of twist or something a bit unpredictable, or like I said, a surprise to kind of make it fit or stand up to the expectations of what people have from cooking my food.
So I know we spoke about 10 ingredients, but let's say you could only have one. Like one ingredient that defines.
I think it needs to be that lemon on the cover on my T-shirt.
Yes, love the T-shirt.
Yeah, it's because you can do so much with a lemon, and I think people who have been cooking recipes that I've published over the years would know that there's a lot of things that I do with lemons that are. So there's the juicing and the zesting and the grating and infusing it, but there's also various ways to roast it and add it to salads and to preserve it. So there's preserved lemons there. And so I still kind of I still think there's ways with lemon that I haven't discovered yet that I'm waiting to discover, because it's just such a great ingredient, and it does encompass quite a lot of my cooking if it has to be one ingredient.
Okay. I want to talk a bit more about the cookbook. So I find that this may be the cookbook that I cook most from out of all the ones. Do you have any favorite recipes? Because as I said, like I love there's a dish called hot charred tomatoes with cold yogurt, which is so delicious and really easy to make. And the first time where I think I've only had to run to the shops and buy the tomatoes. I had everything else in the kitchen.
Did you?
Yes.
Yeah. No, this set of ingredients is quite common, I'd say. Recipes that I love from the book, it's the things that I cook quite often is there's a pasta dish with harissa, olive, capers, and it's a kind of North African inspired set of ingredients. So I kind of took the liberty to add some yogurt when I serve it, which is not very Italian, and pasta is considered to be an Italian thing. But the connections between North Africa and southern Italy are really very, very evident when you go to places like Sicily or Sardinia or southern Italy. So it is a recipe that is a kind of a hybrid of those two food cultures. And I make it. There's a really good brand of rose harissa from Belazou. That's a really good brand, and you find them in supermarkets now. And it really doesn't entail much more than getting that and some tomatoes and, like I said, capers, olives, and it just creates the most incredible pasta. And you can put it on the table kind of within the time it takes to cook the pasta, or just a little bit longer than that. So that's a favorite. There's also a recipe that I really love, which is kind of a little bit more personal. It's a gnocchi alla romana. It's a semolina gnocchi. It's not gnocchi from potato that most people might know, but it's made with semolina. And my grandmother, who was Italian, used to make that. And again, some people who grew up in this country have a really negative association with semolina because it's been served in some schools, I hear, it was part of the not so loved repertoire of school canteens in this country. But luckily I was spared that. I arrived late enough to not have to go through this. But semolina is a great ingredient. It's like absorbs flavor, it's flavors. It's really very smooth and beautiful. In Indian cooking, you find great ways with semolina. And so essentially the semolina is cooked with parmesan and butter and some nutmeg, and then made into little circles, and those are put under the grill with some more cheese. And it's you don't really have to say much more than that to make
yes, I'm getting very hungry.
So that's another favorite recipe. But there's also like desserts, like there's a blueberry and lemon loaf cake, which is really, it could be anyone's really. I just think it's a really good recipe, and I put that together really quickly, and it's nice to have a cake with very little effort in the house.
Great. Let's shift gears and talk a little bit about other things. So I follow your social media accounts, and you post lots of pictures from your test kitchen.
Yeah.
So at Google, obviously, like we're all about the innovation. I want to understand how you go about developing recipes, because you basically do it as a full-time job.
Yeah. I am, really. I develop recipes as a full-time job. That's how that's how I fill most of my time now. I go to the restaurants a lot too and try the recipes, but I don't cook in the restaurants. And I've kind of, my way of developing recipes has really evolved over time. So when I started testing recipes, I used to do it all from my kitchen at home. I used to live in West London, and I had a small kitchen. Up until the book Plenty, I tested every recipe by myself at home. And I used to take my car, go to the supermarket, buy the ingredients, cook, write the recipe, do the washing up. And it was a very inefficient way of producing recipes. But since I only needed to come up with one recipe a week, it was kind of doable. But also, the other problem was that I found it really difficult to get inspired in this way. So I would sit with things and have conversations, but really it was quite a kind of a lonesome way of working. And about 10 years ago, we started the test kitchen, which you're talking about, which it's not a very, if you come there, it's not a very glamorous environment. This is not Google head office, but we made it really kind of look like anyone's kitchen, in the sense that it's a very low-tech kitchen. The philosophy behind that is because I don't want to create something that people won't recreate at home.
Right.
So the ingredients come from just ordinary supermarkets, and the equipment is a basic equipment. And I know a lot of people have fancy equipment at home, but not everybody. And I want to know what is the kind of the basic result that people would get when I try something. That was the idea behind the test kitchen. And I've got a team now of about 3 people, and sometimes more, because chefs come from the restaurants to try their recipes there too. And it's become really like a great creative hub, because people, so I've got my team that develop recipes for books and other publications. I've got the chefs coming from the restaurants, and the conversations are just really, really interesting. So if something comes up in one environment, it is completely relevant immediately to the other environment, but needs to be changed and evolved. Like, for instance, for ROVI is a restaurant that I opened a few months ago in Fitzrovia, actually not that far from here. And,
which is great, by the way. We'll get onto that.
And we did a lot of pickling and preserving for that, because we were working on recipes for the restaurant way before it opened, and the notion of seasonality was not so clear at that point, because we didn't know whether we're going to open in June or whether it's going to be September, and things really changed. So we pickled quite a lot of stuff and fermented and made sure that the restaurant is focused on a grill, on which we grill mostly vegetables, but also some meat and fish. And we wanted to get those kind of really enticing and strong flavors, but like I said, we didn't really know exactly when it's going to open, so we had to preserve and ferment. And this is for home cooks. That's quite a big investment for the future, because it takes days and weeks for things to kind of come to their own. And so we just did a little shortcut. So we took one thing that would be we've got a chili and tomato ferment, which is one of my favorite, and we served it as a condiment to many of the dishes in ROVI. But we took certain shortcuts. We would use kind of, you add a little bit of vinegar and a little bit of sugar, not a lot, but just a tiny bit to get it started, and then you leave it for 1 day or not as long as that, etc. So those are conversations that we constantly have. So everybody tries recipes, and we all get together when it's time to taste and comment, and notes, very meticulous notes are being taken down, because for me, recipes are really, they have to work. I know it sounds really like it's common sense, but I know it's not, because some recipes don't work. And so we tested like a lot. Once that's done, there's a woman who lives in Wales and has got a few kids and a husband and extended family, and she tests the recipes on her family. And only once that comes back to me with a kind of a completely set of comments that are satisfying, only that the recipe is released to the world. So it's a very long process, with various stages.
Sounds like the Google hiring process almost. How many make the cut? Like, is it 2 out of 10 recipes that make the cut?
When they get to her, most of them make the. So we would never send. I would never send something that I'm not really 100% happy with. Yeah. And I learned from my experience that normally, if I have some doubts, then she confirms them, because she tested. Claudine, who's my recipe tester in Wales, she cooked every dish I've ever published. These are thousands of recipes now. She really knows what the level is and the expectations, and she has very honest people around her also kind of confirming what she thinks. So normally they come fine, but I have a way of reading what she says. Like, sometimes she says I do want the truth, but she says, like, when it's like excellent, I loved it, there's no problem. But sometimes she writes like nice.
And she's English, so nice.
No, she's half French, half English. But nice is kind of. I know. So if I had a tiny bit of doubt about that recipe when it went to her and it came back with a nice, then we take it back and try it again and sort of put a big question mark around it and ask her, do we really love it?
Yeah.
Because you really need to love the recipes that go out there, because people cook them, they go buy the ingredients, feed their friends and family. You really want them to be pretty spectacular, because otherwise, why?
Well, I'll ask one more question, but I would ask Googlers to have your questions ready. There's a microphone waiting there. My last question is going to be about food trends. So it feels like veganism is a really big thing right now. And you've been an early supporter, I would say. I mean, with plenty more. You've been flying the plant flag for a very long time now. So do you think it's going to last? And what are your thoughts about trends in general?
Yeah. So for me, the interest in vegetarian and vegan food has always been a result of not so much of an agenda, but just because I think there's just so much there that could be enjoyed. And so the idea of turning a non-vegan recipe vegan is not something that I enjoy doing. So vegan meat or vegan this or anything that even just feels like you're adapting something is not something that I do naturally, because the culture that I come from, or the general Middle Eastern food culture, has a lot of recipes that are just naturally vegan, and in other parts of the world that's also the case. So I think those are the good vegan dishes. I didn't really love tofu until I went traveling in Southeast Asia and understood what to do with tofu. And it took a while for me to warm up to tofu and see how well it should be prepared. Once I've seen it, I realized, so tofu is not a substitute to meat by any stretch of the imagination. It's a real proper foodstuff in China and Malaysia and Singapore and other places in Southeast Asia. And it's fantastic, but you really need to know what you're doing with it. So I think veganism is great. I think there will be more people having a vegan diet, but I think the strict vegan diet and vegan way of life that I didn't really enjoy in its earliest incarnation, which was kind of about, like I said, kind of translating other foods into a vegan language, is not something that I think will stay for a very long time. But I think what will become more and more evident is that people want to eat more and more vegan dishes, but not strictly vegan. And that's what you see, that people say talk quite a lot about flexitarianism is the world that people used to. It sounds very. It sounds a bit like something you'd put as a headline but it stands for something much deeper than that. It's an understanding that you need to change your way of eating, but you need to be also practical about it. That there's human nature, that we're humans, that we have certain inclinations, that we kind of make certain sacrifices. But so I think that would be the way we see veganism transforming itself into the next, reinventing itself going into the future.
But also plants just being celebrated, like, in ROVI, the things that you do with corn, for example. Yeah,
with corn or with celeriac or with cauliflower or with courgettes. I mean, all these things, like what I said about lemon, that I'm just feeling like I'm scraping the surface, is true about other vegetables. And I think vegetables also have more potential to do interesting things with them than meat and fish. Because meat and fish are really great as they are. You put a bit of oil and salt and you grill it and you've got something delicious. But vegetables, it takes a little bit more. But once you start, you get way more flavor. And the techniques of cooking are much more diverse, and Plenty More, which is an older book that I published. It was all about how cooking techniques really create very different results with the same vegetables.
With that, let's take some audience questions.
Don't
be shy.
Google people cannot be shy.
Yes, come on.
That is not possible, is it? There we go.
Hi there. Thanks for joining us today. My question is, what is your take on sustainability? Specifically, does things like locally sourced produce or organic materials, how much does that factor into the recipes you come up with?
It has become increasingly more relevant to me over the years. I think It's definitely not been high on my agenda when I started my writing cookbooks and cooking in general. But I've, like many other people, I've come to realize how important it is to keep this in mind. And again, like the way I spoke about veganism, I feel a little bit the same about sustainability. You need to be careful how you apply it, because there is a tendency to look at things at extremes and black and white. So trading in spices has been something that has been going on for a very long time, for millennia, and will keep on doing. And I think it's a good thing. Importing water from Fiji has not happened for a very long time, and I think is not a good thing. And I think there's a lot of, in between those two, there's a whole range of behaviors that we need to kind of look at. And it's becoming more and more evident that we need to do much less on the sustainable level, on the non-sustainable level than we do. But we need to be, I'm being very pragmatic about it. One of the things that we're doing a lot at ROVI, but also in the other restaurants, is working with farmers from the area, which is from southeast of England. And the partnerships are really incredible. So things like shiso leaves, which are really kind of Japanese, are grown in Dorset, and and we get them within a few hours. And so it's just really beneficial and useful and good to think that way, because you constantly discover things that are possible that you haven't. But as far as I can tell, coffee will never come from UK. It will be grown in the UK, but we will still carry on enjoying coffees, but hopefully not in paper cups, but in kind of glass cups that we can bring with us to the coffee shop.
Hi, can I become a recipe tester?
Yeah.
Number two, you mentioned a family. How do you create a sense of fun, creativity, curiosity at home when it comes to food and cooking? Yeah,
it's really difficult. I think one of the, I've got two boys. They are young. They're 3 years old and 5 years old. And my initial idea, so had you asked me this question before I had children, I had this kind of ideal notion that I've just put everything on the table and let them experience, and and they'll eat what you eat and all the rest. It doesn't really work like that. The new version of this theory, the slightly more realistic version of this theory, is that yes, I do adapt things for my children. Like any other child that I know, their first port of call, these ages, I mean, is a bowl of pasta with sauce and tomato sauce and cheese, and I'd give them that all the time. I put other things around, and we eat other things, and we get them excited. But I think showing them what's going on is really, really useful, because children are just naturally curious. I mean, way more curious than adults. So it's something that you do, even if it's not, if you're going to pickle something, they will just ask lots of questions before they even think it's something that they will eat. So just opening a kind of a window there to the way things are is really useful. And it doesn't mean you need to cook a lot. It just means that when you cook, you kind of just expose it, or even just talking about this or being interested. I think that is the first step to get kids involved in this world. And it could be really even something like it shows how middle class we are. But Max, my oldest son, came back from school last year and said to me, "Oh, I know how to make sushi." So they were rolling sushi at school. I said, wow. Really? That's interesting. I don't know how to make sushi. And I think he was really proud of kind of being able to be there at that moment. So that is probably, but there's all sorts of you can do all sorts of things like that, give them a little job, let them do it. You might not even cook that thing that they did, but it's just getting them involved, I think, is really, really important.
Do you ever experience the chef version of writer's block? And how do you overcome it?
Yeah. So I do, and I did more, but now, so this goes back to the test kitchen, which is, I don't think I actually finished developing this idea about how the creative process happens. I stopped at how strict we are at testing recipes, but I didn't really talk about the creative process. And this is really interesting because, like I said, when I stopped working singularly and I started working in a group, I found that it's really helpful for everybody. It's very helpful for me, that's for sure, because every person brings their own story, history, palette to the conversation, which is great. But it's also what happens when you talk about an idea in a group and how it evolves. So often we go like, oh no, it's asparagus season again. It's like the dreaded thing, because it's like in Britain we don't have a lot of things that are like really seasonal and really off the place, and asparagus is one of them, and gooseberries is another one. But there's like, how many columns about asparagus can you write? But but actually when you sit down with 3 or 4 people and you just you're going to talk about columns, it's incredible how much you can comes through those particular conversations, much more than you'd think would come out of you if you haven't had those people around. So one person's idea sparks an idea in your mind that you didn't really even have, and you've developed it into something completely different. So Jeremy Lee, who is a chef that I really like, rolls his asparagus in phyllo and just sprinkles it with parmesan and fries it or bake it. It's a really great dish. And I just had that in my mind when we had the latest asparagus discussion, which was probably, in January or something. And that idea of rolling the asparagus in something could completely take you in a completely different direction. It's an image more than anything else. But it's something that you can just use or take. You can coat it, you can, with something which isn't a pastry or anything. But so those conversations are really, really useful in the group, starting with one thought and then kind of just rolling into something else. And so that's how the recipes evolve, and from those conversations and from tasting.
We'll take 2 more questions. Yes, go on.
Hi. I'm not exactly the best cook, maybe not even very good. Have you got any kitchen cheats or hacks that could help my skill level?
First of all, I want to say, before I give you a bit of advice, is that it's funny how it goes back to the conversations this discussion that we had about cooking at ease. There's a real pressure to be good at everything, and cooking is not something you need to be good at. There's so many good places to eat, and all around, everywhere. And I feel that there's this pressure to just for everybody to cook, and I know a lot of people that don't really love cooking that much, and it's really not a problem. So you're in a safe space. It's absolutely fine. My sister, when I came up with this book, she said to me, "Oh my gosh, finally I can cook your food," because she's not the most. I don't think it's her number one leisure activity, and she's got 3 kids. She's got a busy job, a busy life, and she just didn't cook. So this book is full of tricks for you. And I think one of those things is, like, I can only say is that if you see a recipe that says to you, "I want to eat that," that's step 1. That's really important. And the next step is just read carefully through and see nothing challenging or too overcomplicated, and try it. I think that is the best way around it. I mean, there is a dish here that another pasta dish. I think that's a very a very good place to start. It's got tinned chickpeas and za'atar and olive oil, and those are all cupboard ingredients, and it's something you can put together very quickly, and you can be really proud of your achievement without kind of and not feel like you've cheated in a very substantial way, because again, it doesn't matter, because when people taste it and say it's amazing, you don't need to tell them how easy it was.
Thank you.
Hi. So what's next for you for the next 1 to 5 year plan?
That's
Google's
a long,
really
yeah. That is a kind of a long trajectory. Well, I don't really know, and that's a very genuine answer, because I have never had a plan. So there's definitely going to be a book coming out, not next year, because I'm taking a year off because it's been like too much. But the year after that, I'm going to have another book coming, and that book will explore the notion of flexitarianism that I talked about. So I don't want to kind of reveal too much of it, but I think a little bit that you can be, I mean, don't quote me on that, but you can be a vegetarian and you can still use fish sauce. No, probably not. But the notion that you could choose that kind of line of eating and cooking is the way I'm exploring now. So kind of flavor ideas or flavor bombs that could really enhance your vegetable-focused meal and turn them into something super delicious is what I'm thinking about for that book. But it's really just the beginning because I've got a couple of years to work on that, or a year and a half. And then I don't really know, I have to be honest. I don't think we're going to open another restaurant for at least, I don't know, 2 or 3 years, because restaurants are a nightmare. Even successful restaurants behind the scene are a nightmare, because it's just really difficult to run a restaurant. And with Brexit, we also have less people coming through the door to take the jobs that we want and we need. So it's become increasingly more difficult. But the restaurants are doing well, so there probably will be another one at some point, but there isn't one planned for any time in the very near future.
Will you expand internationally?
Expand internationally? This is a conversation that we've had a lot in the past, and the difficulty with that is that first of all, it's a lifestyle choice, so that means someone needs to be going from one country to the other all the time to make sure it's done properly. And the other is the quality control. So you need to partner with someone that really understands the ethos and how it works. And I know there's a lot of chefs that do that. Some do it really well, others failed. So there's all sorts of examples of how that international expansion plays out. But it's a possibility. But and like I say, I don't know how many conversations I've been in when we discussed that option and then dismissed it on all sorts of grounds. So I don't know yet. We'll see.
Okay, well, I think we may have to wrap it up. A few closing comments from me. Market Square, no, not Market Square, Cafe Royale is celebrating the book, and they've cooked at least a dozen dishes for you to try out, which is great. Yotam has a podcast, which is actually really excellent. You can find it on Spotify. Features guests such as Lin-Manuel Miranda, Nigella Lawson, Nadia Hussain, great to listen to. And last but not least, already a best-selling book. So hopefully you will enjoy the dishes and go out and buy the book. But can you please join me in thanking Yotam for coming in today? Thank you.